Welcome to the CO.AS.IT cultural program online. This is the Italian Cinema Forum for 2020 and my name's Mark Nicholls. This is our third forum for the season and today's film we're going to be discussing is Kate Wood's Looking for Alibrandi. In the past two sessions I've been talking to you pretty much down the barrel. I have a little bit more information I want to get across, so I'm doing things a little bit differently. So what follows this introduction is a kind of a lecture format, and I'll be showing you some visuals, making a few points, and hopefully illuminating this fascinating and enjoyable film. So please grab your Aperol Spritz, sit down on the couch, your Prosecco, your caffè latte, whatever you like, and I hope you'll enjoy these ideas about looking for Alibrandi. In this image, we can see Pia Miranda as Josie in the centre. To our left is Diane Viduka, who plays Anna, and to our right is Serafina, who is played by Leon Carlo. In a key scene, Serafina's telling Josie and Anna about her new boyfriend. Dark roots emerging from her bottle blonde hair. His name's Massimo and his family's from the north of Italy, and his mum's like, you know, that's why we have blonde hair. I mean, can you believe it? So I said, excuse me, signora, I mean, look at my hair, and my parents are from Calabria. This is a joke and partly a self-deception, but on one level this anecdote communicates the way that Looking for Alibrandi represents ethnicity and the importance of self-definition to its notion of ethnicity. Like categories of gender and sexuality in postmodern multicultural society, ethnicity and ethnic identity are exposed in the film as, in part, the kind of cultural constructions which shun fixed and established ethnic categories. My concern here is the way notions of cultural heritage and self-definition compete in the film, and how the film problematizes traditional representations of Italian-Australian ethnicity in Australian cinema. Considering Looking for Alibrandi as perhaps one of the most widely known films of Italian-Australian cinema, what I want to do here is demonstrate how the film engages with some key themes that are common to that cinema since the 1950s. Since the arrival in Australia of the high-profile Milanese actor Walter Chiari to play Nino in They're a Weird Mob, the cultural divide between southern and northern Italy has become a theme frequently addressed in Italian-Australian cinema, especially in the films of Monica Pellizzari, which include Rabbit on the Moon, No No Nonno, and her feature film Fistful of Flies. By introducing the myth of the fair-haired northerners, Serafina in Looking for Alibrandi points to the absurdities of maintaining such cultural hierarchies of ethnic purity and superiority in the age of L'Oreal bottle jobs. Just as the film's invocation of the North-South issue expresses Italy itself as a multicultural political construction of the Risorgimento, Looking for Alibrandi demonstrates that Italian-Australian ethnicity and culture are hardly fixed entities. With her fake blonde hair, Serafina well represents both her generation of Italian-Australians and one of Looking for Alibrandi's central energies, the drive towards self-definition and a relative freedom from the oppression of tradition, family, class, and the baggage of prejudicial and essentialist notions of ethnicity. This desire for cultural freedom is certainly the desire of the Alibrandi women, Katia, played by Elena Cotta, Cristina, played by Greta Scacchi, and, as she'll discover, Josie herself. Importantly, this is a desire not limited to the film's Italian-Australian community, as we see in the narrative of Josie's impeccably connected Anglo-blonde beau John Barton, played by Matthew Newton. For all his studied normality, John Barton also has an ethnicity extending beyond racial categories to the associated cultural pressures applied by an overbearing father, a high-profile conservative politician. It's from the constraints of his father's expectation that John Barton longs to be released. Josie's story is similarly one in which she comes to understand that she too is weighed down by an element of cultural baggage beyond her previous understanding. Her well-defined sense of the Alibrandi curse, which she thinks is the result of her own illegitimacy, gains further dimension by the end of the film when Josie learns of Cartier's infidelity with the kindly Anglo-Australian patron lover Marcus Sanford. In addition to this is the resultant birth of Josie's own mother, Christina. To be free of this heritage and to free her mother and Nonna from this Madonna whore ethnicity is part of Josie's desire and central to her journey. In the world of Josie Alibrandi, Serafina can successfully problematize notions of ethnicity by changing the colour of her hair. This doesn't stand as a mask or a disguise or even a self-deception, but as a confident drive towards a notion of self-definition. Like Josie's narrative, Serafina's act strikes out against fixed notions of ethnicity, which can mean captivity, discrimination, and exploitation. Problematizing these categories, the role of second and third generation Italian Australian liberates. Blonde hair, as Serafina might say, doesn't mean shit. I'm not arguing here that Looking for Alibrandi is a sophisticated postmodern debate about the nature of Italian Australian ethnicity. What I'm arguing is that through Josie, the film represents a contemporary reality about the prospects of second, third generation Italian Australians, which are pursued beyond class stereotypes and with an appropriate confidence towards achievement. What I consider a key issue of this film is that Josie is a character who has a psychological makeup which is not overwhelmed by the dilemmas of her ethnicity. Her ethnicity is part of her story, but only one part. It doesn't stop her from pursuing and presumably achieving her desire. Nor does Josie's ethnicity play a central role in the infidelity narrative involving her nonna, which stands as a significant factor in her life. In terms of film genre, Looking for Alibrandi allows its central Italian-Australian protagonist a late-teen rite of passage narrative, which has an optimistic outlook and which does not have to be overwhelmed by her ethnicity. Josie Alibrandi stands as a character who challenges conservative government attempts at multiculturalism rollback. Josie's moved beyond the aspirations to which contemporary conservative thought has endeavoured to restrict the socially mobile ethnic underclass to the great expectations of the Charles Dickens novel that we see Josie reading early in the film. At the beginning of Looking for Alibrandi, between the icons of Tomato Day in Little Sicily and Bondi, Josie challenges the preservation of the traditions of the old country and the new country, just as she outlines her big plans for the year, which include blitzing her final exams and going to university to study law. Josie has high ambitions. What Josie's initial relaxed confidence and the narrative as a whole tell us is that these plans are legitimate and achievable. Despite the sociological accuracy of past representations of Italian Australian experience, this film gives no sense that Josie's ethnicity will have any part in prohibiting her from achieving her goals. Even the pressures closer to home, getting Nonna off her back, and the associated comically portrayed surveillance of her comings and goings, in no way frustrate her drive, despite their arguable relationship to the more negative aspects of her Italian-Australian environment. Furthermore, I suggest that when the information of Cartier's infidelity does come to light, and Josie gains the third part of her quest for self-understanding, a quest partly associated with her knowledge of her paternity, it's a largely unrelated thing to her Italian-Australian heritage and community. Josie's own illegitimate birth is the cause of community scandal. As Josie explains, the Alibrandi women have not been excluded but tolerated from the Italian group as a result of her birth. This increases the community's surveillance and anchors them to the superstitious Italian-Australian tribe and its moral prejudice. Cartier's indiscretion with Marcus Sanford is no scandal and produces no curse because nobody knows about it. The explanation Cartier gives for her liaison with Marcus Sanford is related to specific concerns of Italian migrant experience in Australia, particularly those of proxy brides, although it's important to note that Cartier is not a proxy bride. These experiences, however, are not further located within the social politics of the Italian-Australian community life. Unlike Josie's illegitimacy, Cartier's indiscretions are unknown to the network. Thus, for Josie, a major part of her mystery is largely unrelated to the Italian community and its mores, and more directly related to issues of gender, sexuality, and generational relations, common enough too, but hardly the sole property of Italian Australians. In Looking for Alibrandi, the Australian-Italian narrative has stood aside from this social and class angst which has dominated Italian-Australian cinema in the past. This is perhaps best explained in terms of film genre. Although films such as Moving Out and Fistful of Flies use traditions of the teen flick in their rite of passage narratives, unlike Looking for Alibrandi, they linger to a large extent on the best traditions of melodrama of cultural and sexual tribal oppression. Although Gino Condello in Moving Out, and to a greater extent Mars Lupi in Fistful of Flies, demonstrate a certain achievement of freedom, they are largely characters who are acted upon and locked into their environment of oppression. Thus, the stories of Gino and Mars have more in common with melodrama than Looking for Alibrandi and the teen, light, tragi-comedy of films like Dead Poets Society. Given her illegitimacy and the taboo it confers upon her, Josie Alibrandi is threatened with being locked into the potentially oppressive environment of old country prejudice and superstition. As we see in the Tomato Day scene, however, her attitude to these threats is both feisty and defiant. Josie demonstrates a great level of understanding of, and a sense of humour about, the Little Sicily thing, which has so often trapped and frustrated characters such as Gino and Mars, as it has trapped and oppressed Josie's Nonna. Furthermore, Looking for Alibrandi shows Josie taking an active role as the liberator or plumber of the unconscious of others, particularly that of her Nonna. Unlike the heroines of the melodrama, Josie does not allow herself to be taken away by the importance of rules, rituals, curses, and the idea of la bella figura which inhabit others. As such, Josie has no place in melodrama, a genre which is all about being trapped by these things. She refuses to become trapped herself and she refuses to allow others to remain victims, as she demonstrates in the unlocking of her nonna's infidelity with the Anglo Marcus Sanford, and in getting Christina to articulate her very private desires and frustrations. A marker of her maturity, and perhaps the maturity of looking for Alibrandi's representation of Italian Australian life, is Josie's recognition of the connection between sexual excess and this idea of a threat of destruction. Josie has seen the repression and social containment which has been the result both of Nonna Katia's violent husband and his disgusting ways, and Katia's emotional release from that situation in her illicit liaison with Marcus Sanford. Katia's life of secrets, propriety obsession, and the punishment of her daughters and granddaughters' public shame stand as a key example of the way the Italian Australian in these films can be seen as a victim of his or her own sexuality. Katia's sexuality is both the site of her oppression and a release from that oppression, but a release which has contained her all over again. Born as both a sign of that love and containment, Christina also sought escape in her own sexuality. Becoming pregnant to Michael, however, she became trapped again. Central to her narrative, these events are key indicators to Josie and tell us something of her reluctance to go all the way with her boyfriend Jake. Looking somewhat like the good girl in an American Family Association documentary on the evils of sex before marriage, Josie nevertheless demonstrates a challenge to sex-violent destruction nexes which have dogged the Italian-Australian characters both in the cinema and, of course, in her own narrative. Josie rejects the identity annihilation which has been the result of her mother's and grandmother's sexual experience, just as she rejects Sarah's suggestion in relation to John Barton. Why don't you just, fuck the guy and get it over and done with? As Josie says early in the film, give me a few years and I'll be running things, and it won't be a small Italian family either. I'm not going to be trapped like them. While hardly a pregnancy-threatening experience, nor an explicit rejection of Jake for something better, Josie's decision not to have sex with Jake is a sign of her challenge. Josie has no intention of being trapped into a life of class and ethnic discrimination by the melodrama of hormonal imperatives. Hardly a prude, Josie's choice to avoid what promises to be an experience interrupted by Jake's premature ejaculation, if not by his father returning to the room with cups of tea, is a sign of her empowerment and freedom from that destiny. In terms of rebellion, sexuality, and sexual oppression, looking for Alibrandi thus reads much more like a kind of optimistic version of Pellizzari's Fistful of Flies and Pattinson's Moving Out. The cost to Mars in Fistful of Flies is an experience commonly represented in Italian-Australian cinema, that of intense domestic violence at the hands of an ignorant and scared patriarch, a cycle of rebellion and punishment which will, it seems, inevitably continue. For Gino, in Moving Out, the rebellion implicit in his desire not to leave Fitzroy for Doncaster is only barely articulated and easily repressed within his ultimate conformity with the traditional notions of Italian life and his increasing sense of ambivalence towards Anglo-Australian culture. While no more or less accurate in its ethnography, and perhaps even slightly fanciful, Looking for Alibrandi produces another option for the Italian-Australian character in the cinema, and one which, in its lack of monolithic and predetermined cultural baggage, offers new possibilities beyond the kind of bipolar cultural model of Italian-Australian sexual class and cultural identity. That's all I have for you today. I hope you found something here to stimulate you, above all, to go and watch this fantastic film again and enjoy it for a second, third, or if you're like me, your 10th or 12th time. Meanwhile, there's nothing else for me to do but to wish you the compliments of the season. Buon Natale, buon anno, and that we look forward to seeing you next year in 2021 for the continuation of our forum. If not in person, then definitely online. Grazie, ci vediamo.